Texel density is one of those topics that sound really technical, but it has a huge impact on how your assets actually look. If one object feels crisp and another feels blurry, or your textures just feel inconsistent across the scene, texel density is usually part of that problem. In this video, I'm going to break down what it is, what affects it, and how to think about it in a real game art pipeline. In its simplest form, texel density is the amount of pixels per surface area. And that is what allows you to have consistent texture density between multiple objects. Let's say for this example, I have this radio here, and that's going to be sitting at potentially a 4K resolution texture. Why does this radio get a 4K texture resolution, while so does a corkboard, and so does this wooden table, and so does this cutting mat? If we approach it that way, our texel density between objects is going to be completely off. So let's look at and visualize exactly what texel density is. As I said, texel density is the amount of pixels per surface area. In this case, we have a 4K, as in 4096 by 4096 pixel resolution texture image being applied to a 2 meter or 200 centimeter plane. And so to illustrate this even more clearly, I have this representation here at the top. At 4K resolution being applied to a 200 centimeter square, this is the density of pixels. Now, this is not a one-to-one, but what this does is illustrate the amount of pixels per centimeter. If I select this object, you can see that I'm just using an array, and each one of these guys, that's 1 centimeter right there. All the way, this is 1 little centimeter with a really small texture being applied, like 20 pixels. Then I increase the array vertically and horizontally until I get up to 2 meters. Now, as I lower the resolution of our texture, we can see that the density starts to change. I can see now there's less pixels per centimeter. And I continue to change that as I reduce the texture resolution of the image. It's clear that a 1K pixel, or 1024 by 1024, has significantly less texture density than this 4K at 200 centimeters, all the way down up until we get to 512. Now, that is just one factor. You'll notice that the size of the object doesn't change. What's changing here is the texture resolution of the image. That is having a direct impact on the texel density. So that also means if we keep a constant, as in the same texture resolution, and change the size, that also has a large factor on the texel density. So now the constant here is a 2K pixel 2048 by 2048 resolution texture being applied to different sized objects. And pay attention to what's happening to the density. Now we have half the size. So we have a 1 meter square that has a 2K resolution texture, and that's 2048 pixels per centimeter. Remember that number, 2048 or 20.48? That is the same as a 4K texture being applied to a 200 centimeter plane. When I broke this down to kind of help me understand this way back, I just kind of took a look and I was like, that's literally what it means. It's just the amount of pixels per centimeter, but it's all these different variables that impact the density. There are primarily 4 main factors that's going to impact texel density, and we've already hit 2. 1 being the actual texture resolution of the texture. 2 being the size of the object. So as we get smaller, it starts to increase the density by quite a bit. 3 is the actual UV size. So now if I jump into edit mode, select these UVs and scale this, look at this. And this is how we get tiling textures. This is why we get tiling textures that look incredibly high resolution. The 4th is the distance from the camera. I could take this guy, 512 at 2.5 pixels per centimeter squared, move him all the way back here now. Almost the same size relative to each other. So if I bring it back, now we start to notice, okay, the screen space, the actual resolution of the pixels that we're viewing this in, which could be 1920 by 1080, 2560 by 1440, 4K, or ultra wide. All of these are going to have a factor. Now, the reason why I bring up the camera distance is because if I look at our workbench here that we've been building, and I know I'll be always looking at this environment in this way. Maybe this is a first-person camera, maybe this is a third person, but what matters is the distance of this camera from these objects. Now, this guy here is taking up a vast majority of the screen. So this is easily going to need a large amount of pixels per centimeter. Now we've already hit on those magic numbers. 2048 is ideal for hero props and is a standard that most of the industry adopts. 1024 is great for objects that are in front of the camera, but that aren't being zoomed in as close to something that's 2048. So let's see this in practice. I want to take just these two guys, the corkboard and our hammer. Both of these objects are 4K resolution. Now, we're not working with perfect squares. We're not working with a perfect 1 meter plane here anymore. So let's head to our UV editor. And there's this fantastic tool called Texel Density Checker, meaning if I head over and look at our corkboard, select the entire corkboard and say, hey, let's apply a 2K texture to this object and calculate the TD, which is our texel density. That gives us 13.445 pixels per centimeter. 10 is decent, 20 is ideal. So what happens now if I bump this up to a 4K resolution texture? Okay, now I'm sitting at about 26 pixels per centimeter. That is a great amount of pixel resolution for this large object. Just so we're all on the same page, this is a 4K texture being applied to this object. So now I could zoom in here and you can see how well all of this texture detail holds up. But now what about the hammer? The hammer itself has about 4K resolution just for this asset. Let's look at this in substance. That's this texture here. That's this guy, right? And if we look at the UVs, we can see actually we have quite a bit of unused texture space. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is utilizing a lot of texture space for this single asset. So now back to Blender, if I head to the UV editing, select all of the faces and say, hey, this does have a 4096 texture. Want to guess what the texel density is going to be? 111 pixels per centimeter. Is this necessary? Absolutely not. And I want to refer you to a fantastic resource, and that is this website by Beyond Extent. He has an amazing YouTube channel, awesome podcasts, game art pipeline talks, and a great website that has all of this game art production. And what he does is he breaks this down so well that you could just read this article and get a good sense to, okay, this 2048 by 2048 texel density is going to be significantly higher than an object that is much larger with a lower texture resolution. So again, check this out and you'll get a good idea of context, where first person, third person, and where these, I would call them industry standard guidelines. As long as you use this as a guideline, it's going to help you prepare your assets so they're not overly dense with pixel resolution. If you want to learn game art the right way and not just follow random tutorials, I built a full game art program that walks you through the entire pipeline from an idea to a finished portfolio piece. It's split into 2 courses. Modeling and UV mapping foundations is the first one, and texturing, rendering, and presentation is the second. Each has over 40 modules, 15 hours of narrated content, exercises, time lapses, project files. And you're not doing it alone. You get access to a private Discord community where you can ask questions and get feedback along the way. If you want real-world production workflows you can use for both studio work and your personal projects, the program is live now. I'll see you there. If we start heading down now, you can see that I have a 4K and 4K. Let's bring out a 2K texture. Now, all right, 2K texture resolution. And this is, we change this to 2K, and we see that this is, okay, at about 13.5 pixels per centimeter. This one is still a lot at 55. Now we bring a 1K texture, and now we start to notice, all right, once we get down to 1K resolution, it is pretty obvious that we're not getting enough resolution to support this area. Our hammer is doing perfectly fine. Watch, we select this, even at 1K. We calculate the TD, and that's still almost 30 pixels. Head even lower. Now our corkboard looks really bad. It looks like a blurry mess. Our hammer, still doing fine. We can check this at 512. Calculate that TD, and it's about 14. So now here comes the importance of texel density. These texel density guidelines allow you to have multiple objects in a scene that have consistent texel density across multiple objects. There is nothing worse in game art or immersion breaking when you have a super crisp object next to a very blurry object, like we have here. So that means I can combine and I can say, hey, let's leave this corkboard at 4K, and now look at the difference between the two. This corkboard at 4K resolution is 26 pixels per centimeter. At 512, we're now at 512 pixels. For this hammer, we're at about 13. So we can kind of meet in the middle and say, all right, we can bring this hammer up to 1K, calculate that TD at 1K resolution, and we have about 30. So that's kind of the guideline. It doesn't necessarily need to be perfect. But now we have them much closer to each other in the sense that this corkboard is about 27, and this hammer at 1K is about 27. That's how you get consistent texel density across multiple objects. Or I should say, that's one way, right? Because if I look at this scene and start to get a good idea of the texture resolution per asset, now we can implement one of the variables I talked about, which is UV size. For example, if I grab the elements here on this workbench and hit Shift L and select linked, look at all these objects. All of these objects now have the same material applied. So I can just remove these textures and you can see that they're all using the same texture. If I select the lamp, for example, again, in my UV editor, select Shift L, select material, select all of these objects. Now look at that. Now, all of these objects that are packed to a single texture resolution have a really good amount of texel density at a 2K resolution texture. And then I could say, you know what, since all of these are a single object, let me just grab the texel density of a single object on this UV map, set it to 4K, and at a 4K resolution, that gives us about 30 pixels per centimeter. So that's the sweet spot. We have a 4K texture that's going to give us very high cinematic quality textures for real time, and it can be far more optimized when we set it down to 2K resolution. That's the importance here of atlasing our textures and combining them into a single texture set. So you can see, obviously, an asset like this wall here is going to be its own dedicated texture set. Floor, wall, same thing. Window, corkboard, all of these are going to make sense now. Workbench, it's on its own. And I've gone through and did these calculations in the sense that now I put together this guidance and guideline of, I know my render resolution, 2560 by 1440. I have an idea of how I want to pack these. I'm taking into consideration larger objects versus smaller objects. I'm understanding the camera position. It's not just going to be one fixed camera. We are going to be moving this camera throughout this scene, zooming in on many of these assets, especially the hero car that's right in the middle. And we're doing all of this while maintaining optimization. So hopefully that gives you a clear way to think about texel density, not just in terms of texture size, but also asset scale, UV size, and camera distance. All of these are variables that impacts texel density. This is one of those things that really matter when you're trying to keep assets consistent while staying optimized. If you want to go deeper, I cover the full pipeline in my course, from modeling in UVs through texturing, rendering, and presentation. Check out the link below. I'll see you there.